This post has 1.5 million views. It says the United States currently ranks below Ghana, Namibia, and nearly every single European country when it comes to freedom of the press. You don't get to lecture anyone on this. It's a reply to J.D. Vance, who I guess was lecturing the EU on freedom of the press. But I find this index hard to believe. The index comes from this site. The reason I doubt the US is bad at press freedom is we have many different media organizations, including individuals on social media, who are free, protected by the Constitution, to share their ideas, opinions, facts, data, etc., widely to whatever audience they may happen to find. So it just seems wrong to me to say the US is bad at this. But let's read a little more and see how they define their index. They say the country scoring is based on two components. First, a quantitative tally of abuses against media and journalists in connection with their work. I think that's referring to this section. So they report that there are 0 abuses in the United States in terms of killed since January 1st or detained as of today. And the second component is a qualitative analysis of the situation in each country. I think these are based on responses to a survey that they give. Their survey covers 5 different subsidiary scores, and they say that all subsidiary scores contribute equally to the global score, and within each indicator, all the questions and sub-questions have equal weight. That seems odd to me, because the survey covers questions as diverse as, is the broadcast licensing process transparent? And in the past 12 months, have any journalists been arbitrarily detained or murdered? That seems like a much bigger deal, or you should put much more weight on something like that than having a non-transparent broadcast license process. And there are also things like, have any politicians incited hatred or made public insults to the media? I just don't think that's as big of a deal as arbitrarily detaining or murdering journalists. As far as I can tell, RSF does not share the responses or even the number of responses. So I'm a little skeptical of the whole process. For example, how many journalists filled out this survey in North Korea? I don't know, and they don't say, but we'll set that aside. So let's check out the US, rank 57, and read the qualitative description. Media landscape, generally free from government interference. Nice. Media ownership is highly concentrated. I guess that depends how you define media ownership. Does it count internet news companies, small independent news people? I wouldn't say it's highly concentrated then. There's a growing interest in partisan media, which threatens objectivity. I think that's fair. Public confidence in the media has fallen dangerously. That's probably true. I'm not sure how it relates to press freedom. People might be really skeptical of the media, but the media may still be free to say what they want to. Political context, President Donald Trump, elected to a second term, denigrated the press on a daily basis. True. Explicit threats to weaponize federal government against the media. I think that's fair. Legal framework, the First Amendment to the Constitution provides broad protections for the press. Good. However, no meaningful press freedom legislation has been passed at the national level in recent years. I don't know why that's a problem. If the First Amendment is doing its job, I don't think we need to continually be passing laws to say, yep, press free. The economic context, they talk a lot about many different newsrooms in the United States closing. They don't talk about how many have been open. So they say of the newspapers operating in 2005, over 1/3 have been closed, but they don't say how many have opened since then. They say that many parts of the country are now considered news deserts. I think that's probably fair for local news. Maybe there's not a good local news source in many parts of the country. Although, of course, it would be silly to say that about news more generally at the national or state level or global level, because we have the internet. Socio-cultural context. Again, we have Americans losing trust in the media and online harassment. I don't know what losing trust in the media has to do with press freedom, and I'm not even sure about online harassment. Some people are jerks if you're free to speak. Some people are going to be jerks towards journalists, including women and minorities. So I don't know what that has to do with the press freedom. And then finally, safety. Politicians open disdain for the media has trickled down to the public. And it talks about there were 49 arrests of journalists in 2024 compared to only 15 in 2023. So I noticed that they're mixing President Donald Trump, which they mentioned at the start of this, with Biden in 2024. And if we open their source, the US Press Freedom website, we can see that we're on track to have fewer arrests of journalists in 2025 relative to 2024. So that's good. Maybe we'll move up a rank in the next Press Freedom Index. And if you look at these incidents, I haven't reviewed all of them, I've reviewed some of them. It's mainly things like a journalist is at a protest and gets arrested as part of the protest and then released without charge. That describes the ones I looked at randomly. So, okay, that's the United States. Now let's go look at rank 56, Sierra Leone, the country that's just above us on the Press Freedom Index. So starting off, we have one journalist killed in Sierra Leone this year related to their work. Media landscape is diverse and generally independent. That's good. They go through a count of media outlets. I noticed they didn't do that in the United States. They say that journalists often find it hard to obtain information about public institutions. That seems like a challenge to press freedom. The economic context, most media outlets are concentrated in the capital, Freetown. Sounds like media deserts, right? News deserts everywhere. Most journalists are poorly paid and lack equipment they need to work properly. That sounds like a challenge. Most media outlets survive on advertising. The market's severely limited. The government provides money to the main journalists union, but not to independent media outlets. Possibly a conflict of interest, I would think. Journalists are free to cover the vast majority of social issues without risking censorship or reprisals. So journalists aren't free to cover all social issues. Interesting. Safety, elections are often marked by violence against journalists, especially by political activists, and by fear of internet shutdowns. And the recent news stories about Sierra Leone, anti-terrorism bill exposes journalists to heavy, unjust prison sentences. Ruling party activists storm radio station in Sierra Leone, injuring 5 journalists. Now let's go over the number 1 name in the list, Norway. I'm going to speed through Norway since we're running out of time. Media landscape. Public service broadcaster NRK dominates audiovisual market, I guess that's TV, with primarily one competitor, and they have 230 news outlets. So US is becoming increasingly concentrated. Of course, we have public and private broadcasters, and we have too many news outlets for them to count. But Norway, oh, that's great. You've got one public service broadcaster and one competitor. That's awesome. And 230 media outlets. You're number 1, Norway. I'm a little skeptical of that, if you can't tell. I'm being sarcastic. Norwegian politicians generally refrain from disparaging journalists and dismissing unfavorable coverage as fake news. I think it's bad when Trump says that legitimate news is fake news. That's bad. But in another sense, it's good that the news is saying stuff that angers Trump, drawing his disparaging remarks, and the news is protected by our Constitution and our laws and can continue to disparage Trump. So I think, fake news is kind of an indicator that our press freedoms are working correctly. And I don't think leaders not being rude to journalists is an indicator of press freedom. Constitution guarantees freedom of expression. Hey, same here, Norway. Also protected by other laws. Again, same here. Economic context, the zero VAT policy on news media helps maintain quality and pluralism. So they're saying, hey, if you don't tax journalism products, that's good for press freedom. Okay. Journalists need you to stop taxing them for press freedom. Got it. Then social cultural context, broadly support independent journalism. Professionals occasionally face online harassment. That's fine. Safety, I think they're a pretty safe country. So the list seems pretty silly to me. I'm not convinced by it for reasons I hope I've explained here. I don't think it's meaningful to say the US has worse press freedom than almost every European country. I don't think so. Thanks for your time.